We have finally arrived at games number 69 and beyond. The OHL playoffs are here. And as we get your OHL podcast playoff edition underway, how about a shout out, Dan Mahar, for my buddy Jason Hagholm, who calls the games for Rogers TV in Kitchener. And he brings me, so first he brought me, wait, get over the right shoulder here. There you go. The Cornwall Royals jersey he found on eBay. He even personalized it for me. Put the name Farwell on the back because he knows I want the Royals back into this league. And then a couple of weeks ago, he was on a little road trip. He found himself in Belleville. I saw him post a picture of what is now the CAA arena, used to be the Yardman back in the day. I said, oh, what a great barn. He was enjoying it. Next thing I know, he comes home as I point over this shoulder. If you're watching on YouTube, he said, I was in a thrift store and I found this Belleville Bulls jersey. So he brought it back for me. So Jason Hagholm is now the official set decorator for the OHL podcast. And I'm starting a collection, Dan, of teams I want back in the league. What do you think?
Well, I got to say, Jason, I got to get to know you because that is my all-time favorite jersey, the Black Bulls right there. That is a beauty of a jersey. And yeah, if you're looking for all the teams you want back, Farwell, who's next?
Well, I'll tell you who's next, Dan, because we were talking towards the end of the regular season about things not exactly being rosy in St. Catharines with the Niagara Ice Dogs as far as ownership is concerned. So work with me on this one, okay? We force a sale. Sorry, Darren Dodobler and all the fans there, but the team doesn't move, but we rebrand, get rid of the Ice Dogs and all the bad juju that's been around them the past 4 or 5 years, and we rebrand as the Niagara Falls Thunder. How about it? Maybe the Flyers, whatever.
Oh, I love it. I love it. The late 80s Niagara Falls Thunder were something else. The Brian Fogarty years, that they had some amazing teams. They were something to watch.
We could have a lot of fun with this. So I'm up to 3 now. I got Cornwall, I got Belleville, and we'll keep the team in St. Catharines right where it is, but we'll rebrand it the Niagara Falls Thunder. Here we go, baby.
I'm with you. And as long as those Black Bulls jerseys come back, I'm in.
Okay, sounds good. If you're with us too, drop us a note anytime. ohlpodcast at rogers.com. That man over there is Dan Mahar. You'll find him on X at his name, Dan Mahar. I am on X at Farwell_OHL. And yes, the playoffs are underway. Dan, the big story, I know it's early and it takes 4 wins to complete a series, but the big story in the early days, the first weekend of the playoffs, has got to be in Saginaw, where the defending Memorial Cup champion Spirit are down 2-0 as the Otters not only come in and win both games on the road, but win them by scoring 8 in game 1 and 9 in game 2. Yowza.
Yowza's right. I think I said to you last week that was the series I had the toughest time predicting. And I thought the top end talent on Saginaw, the experience might just pull them through. But I was really loath to go against Erie. And just that Andrew Oak injury, the mysterious Andrew Oak injury, might be the deciding factor. All due respect to Caleb Papineau, just has struggled to shut down that Erie offense, and they are humming. And it's funny because you look at the scorers and you think, wow, they're cruising. But really, both those games turned somewhat on a dime. You had that very first game was 0-0 into the second when Erie exploded for 7 off a couple careless turnovers from veteran players, Chernyshov and Mangoni each in the span of about 10 seconds, 2-0. And that was lights out. There was about 3 more goals in the next couple minutes, and it was over. But those Erie shooters have found something on Papineau, and it seems like anytime they get a look, they're winging it. So it's going to be a tough ask for Saginaw to get back into this one, Mike. But yeah, I don't think anyone saw this coming. I mean, I had faith Erie could make noise in these playoffs, but this, I don't know.
Well, see, you had more faith than I did in Erie then. I'll just remind you, I know it's only a week ago, but lest you'd forgotten, I should be reminded, I think, by everybody in Erie, PA, that I picked Saginaw in 5. I don't like writing off the defending champs too easily, and I like the makeup of the team. I mean, they've got a top line over there in Saginaw, and they've got point producers, Misa, Epperson, Chernishoff. It just goes on and on. That I thought that would be plenty to get them past an Erie team that I didn't think had really settled yet since the coaching change. They're absent Matthew Schaefer, of course, but yeah, the big issue here, and again, not to pick on a kid that I'm sure is not feeling the best after being beaten 17 times. So it's 8-5 in game one. All Erie's goals come in the second period, and then 9-5 in game two, and Papineau's in for the duration for the entire game. And that's the big issue for Saginaw right now, is finding somebody they trust, I guess, to stop the pucks. It's going to be Papineau's water to carry here for the Spirit, but they now face the unenviable task of winning 4 of the next 5 if they want to move on. And I had picked the Spirit in 5 because I wasn't so sure about Erie's state of mind, let's say, coming into this playoff. But boy, oh boy, are they making us look foolish. And you talk about that mysterious injury to Andrew Oak. I'm starting to wonder this, Dan, and we've touched on it in previous episodes. There's no question that hockey, much like football was at the beginning and basketball has been too, has really gotten into bed, if you will, with the gambling industry. I can't help but wonder if we start getting more formalized injury reports from hockey teams. I know it's not going to start in the Ontario Hockey League. It'd probably start in the NHL, but this is just the mystery is the big thing. Oak didn't finish the regular season with Saginaw, and clearly he's not here in the playoffs.
That gambling aspect is something that's always piqued my interest too with these injury reports. I thought things would open up and we'd have a lot more clarity now as a positive to the gambling initiative. However, as a guy who I can tell you, I'm going to lose my NHL pool this year on the fact that Kirill Kaprizov did not have an honest injury report from December through till now. It was listed as day to day for weeks, and then it became month to month. And so just not being able to replace him, thinking he was coming back imminently, is going to cost me that pool. That's small potatoes. I'm sure there's other people elsewhere losing significant money on these things. And, I'm not saying there's a whole lot of money necessarily in OHL gambling yet, but enough that we're seeing it in that series, Mike, when you have the number one goaltender out of it, that clearly is a difference maker. Well, we saw it in the season with Flores in Niagara when they didn't have him, and things got dicey in a hurry. Imagine, Kitchener lost Jackson Parsons, et cetera, et cetera. So having these types of players go down and not really having a good sense if and when they're coming back, yeah, I have always wondered how that affects the gambling outfits as well. But it's tough to figure who's going to win these series when you don't know who's going to be playing for sure.
You score 5, you would expect to win a game in this league or any other, but that's not the case for the Saginaw Spirit, who now have to go on the road in a 2-0 hole. So really interesting stuff going on there, and full credit to the Erie Otters for taking advantage and showing those flashes of offense that we knew the team had, and certainly getting it done as the playoffs get underway. Not a whole lot else in the way of surprises in the West, as both Windsor, or all three of Windsor, London, and Kitchener move out to 2-0 series leads in the first weekend. On the eastern side, though, too, Dan, there was another series that people were wondering about, and I was one of those who decided to go with the quote-unquote upset, the 5-4 in the East. And again, early returns. Game 2 in the Oshawa-Brampton series is underway as we record this episode. But boy, oh boy, did the Gens ever make a statement. A Colby Barlow hat trick, and they hang 7 on the Steelheads to take Game 1 in that series.
Yeah, that was not necessarily an outcome I saw coming. I think we both agreed it could be a coin toss either way, right? You got 2 powerhouse teams. It could go either way. Didn't really see the blowout coming. I think we talked about it earlier. As brilliant a goaltender as Jack Ivankovic is, he's 17. And asking a 17-year-old goaltender to carry the mail in the playoffs is risky. And we've seen it time and again. And this isn't to throw any criticism his way. It was one game. But when you see 6 goals on 16 shots, you have to start questioning, is he just too young? Is this a lot for him to face a potent offense like that Oshawa Generals team can throw at you? So we'll see. It's one game. Early returns, like you said, it's as we record, or that things are going better in game 2. But you have to wonder, because when you have a young goaltender, potentially fragile confidence, and shooters start getting some by him, then those shooters gain confidence at the same time the goaltender's losing confidence, and that could shift the tide there too. So we'll see if Braden Gillespie factors into this series. He was actually pretty strong in relief. They gave up a reasonable amount to get him as an insurance policy on the 17-year-old. So we'll see how this series plays out.
Yeah, I think there are still plenty more games to come in that one. And I like Ivan Kovic. He's been a highly regarded goaltender coming up through this league. He's battle tested at the Hockey Canada World Junior level, etc. So I think there's plenty to like about Ivan Kovic. I'm not concerned at all. I think, though, if you're Oshawa, you have to love what the Gens did coming out of the gates when some pundits, and I'll put myself in that category, weren't too sure. Colby Barlow has decided he's absolutely ready to do something here. And we know. I mean, the Oshawa Generals, despite the fourth place finish in the conference, is probably, and I know we don't play the games on paper, but on paper, Dan, probably the best built of the bunch in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, well, what I look for in the playoffs is you want balance at kind of balance and depth at all positions, and that's hard to achieve. Most teams don't have that, but to the degree you can do that in junior hockey, the Oshawa Generals seem to have built the team that way. And I think there was a little concern down the stretch that the Generals weren't quite firing at all cylinders. Beckett Seneca didn't quite look like himself down the stretch. There was a few question marks, but I think when you get to the playoffs, that's where you really start to see the value of, the Ben Danfords, the Andrew Gibson acquisition we referenced before, the potency up front. There's just a lot of speed. Owen Griffin was humming down the stretch. So you got depth scoring up front as well. So yeah, I think when you look at how they stack up against every other team they're going to face, I think they're even par at worst and better than most. So I think that team's not going to be an easy out for anyone.
Some great storylines still to come as, of course, the playoffs continue and get deeper and fewer teams are involved. Lots of fun ahead of us. Another storyline, of course, is the OHL draft, which is coming up on April the 11th, the priority selection, they call it in the Ontario Hockey League. And with the best odds going into the draft lottery, Dan Mahar, the Peterborough Petes, for the first time in their storied franchise's history, will make the first overall selection on April the 11th.
Yeah, and the lottery kind of held ground, right, for where teams were coming in. Guelph picking up the 2 pick. I think the draft lottery, I understand it. You don't want teams tanking on purpose to get the top pick, and that kind of takes that element out of it. But when you have a really tough year, like some of these teams endure, it is painful. And we've seen it in the NHL with the Detroit Red Wings sliding down a couple spots a couple times, where to go through that rough a year and then lose your top pick or your top 1, 2, or 3 pick and slide down to 4. So it can be devastating at the bookend of a really bad year. So happy for the people in Peterborough, the fans in Peterborough, and for that team. That team grinded it out. They went to battle. They were not tanking. They did everything they could to catch the next team, which was Guelph. They did catch them in the final week before slipping back. But it was a race to the end. I'll give them credit for that. So it's nice for them that they're going to get that top pick. And from what I'm hearing of the draft, a little bit wide open at the top, Mike. There's 4 or 5 names of guys that could go first overall. So it's not that year where you have the clear-cut number 1 or number 2. There's not Nathan Belchets per se, where it jumps off the page at you and says, oh, this guy's obviously the pick. So we'll see what Peterborough chooses to do with that. They've got a few options at their disposal for sure.
I think it's a really interesting case study in the construction of an OHL team, the Peterborough Petes, because of course, we'll remember that they won the championship in 2022. And then in 2023, they sold off. That was the dismantle year for the Petes, right? And so gone are the guys that helped them win that championship. And what they got in return was a bunch of first round picks. So in adding to their own first round pick in Carson Cameron, they add Aiden Young, they add Nico Addy, and they add, help me out here, Dan, there's one more that they put
Taylor.
in. Caden Taylor, thank you very much. Yeah, Aiden and Caden, I was getting confused. So they had 4 first rounders from that draft on their team. Then they had Colin Fitzgerald last year for this season, and he puts up 12 goals as a rookie, which isn't bad with a team that was struggling as much as the Petes were. And now here you are. with the first overall pick. So you're talking 6 first-round picks from the past 3 drafts, all on the Petes as they try to build back up to another potential championship.
For sure. And all those names you just mentioned too, I know at the first half of this year, there was some panic setting in saying, some of these kids aren't quite firing like we had hoped they were. Nico Addy for sure. But getting that much ice time and that much exposure over the first half of the season, we started to see those dividends in the second half. So there's people think of how tough it is to have that complete rebuild and go through all those growing pains, but it gets accelerated in a hurry when those kids get that ice time. And when you're in a market where some of your top picks don't play a whole lot in their 16-year-old year, kind of starting from square one as a 17-year-old. But I don't think you're going to see that from Colin Fitzgerald. He was already showing some signs. You're going to see a huge uptick, I think, next year with Peterborough. And I'm calling it already. They will not miss the playoffs next year.
Whoa, bold. Hey, Dan, we just started the playoffs this year. You're already getting the next year's predictions. I love it.
Got to give them something to hope for, right? So.
Absolutely. One of the other things when it comes to the draft that's always been a curiosity, I think for many that follow this league, is they have the draft basically at the end of round 1 of the playoffs. So teams, especially if you're holding the dual portfolio of head coach, general manager, hello, James Richmond, I'm looking at you, like have fun trying to coach a team in the playoffs and get ready for a draft. But I'm hearing some rumblings, Dan, that the OHL priority selection will shift into June to kind of more closely match what the NHL is doing when it comes to draft time, which I think it makes sense. I don't know why we do it in the midst of the playoffs in the Ontario Hockey League.
No, I think historically, Mike, it was largely because they wanted to get as many of these players signed, sealed, and delivered ahead of NCAA recruitment season as possible. So it gave them a jump on some of that was the primary reason. They might not say that's why, but I think that's why. This shift kind of makes sense in the new landscape, right? That's not as much of a concern. Uh, can I add a wish though if they do that? I think it makes sense. Let's let the teams finish the season, regroup, to have their scouting meetings, not try and multitask at a critical time of year. Can we maybe reseed then based on how well they do in the playoffs so that the draft, if you're a top team, but you go out in round 1, well, then at least your draft pick moved up. The NHL does that. I wonder if the OHL will do that.
That's interesting. It would be an interesting rule to follow along. When you talk about reseeding, I still have a hard time, and we touched on this not too long ago, but I have a hard time with a team that gets a higher seed going into the playoffs by virtue of winning their division, which happened, I think, in both conferences, right? Barrie and Windsor finished with fewer points than teams below them, but by virtue of winning their division, get a higher seed. Not only do they get home ice advantage in the second round, should they go that far against a team that may have had more points than them in the regular season, but they also get to draft lower. And that doesn't make any sense, or get to draft higher, pardon me, which doesn't make any sense at all. Because when it comes to the draft, then they look at them 1 through 20. I don't understand why they would do that. As you mentioned before, Dan, it's like double dipping.
Yeah, 100%. It makes zero sense. I have yet to hear a single argument that can validate why that occurs. And I did see reference to the fact that the WHL may have it right, though, where they do that because they want to acknowledge if a team won a division, there's some sort of reward, so you get that higher seeding, but everything gets reseeded for second round. So what you would see, Windsor gets second seed, sure, they play Sioux in the first round, but once it gets the second round, they're reseeded according to points. So Kitchener would get home ice against Windsor. And I think they do it exclusively to avoid these situations you're talking about right here. Best of both worlds. Maybe you acknowledge that division win, but you don't give them the benefit. At very least, you can't give them the higher pick if you're giving them the higher seed. I think that doesn't make any sense, but we know the OHL has double dipping in a few regards, so they haven't really addressed it yet in either way, so we'll see if they do.
Yeah, we'll touch on that other double dipping that I think you're alluding to in just a moment. But that reseeding that the dub does makes a whole heck of a lot of sense to me, because I do understand the reward and I think I can get behind it for winning your division. So sure, round number 1, you get a lower seed, but then when you reseed, that in turn rewards or re-rewards the team that had the better regular season. And isn't that something that we should also be rewarding when playoff time comes around? Of course it is.
Oh yeah, I for sure. There's just, a kindergarten student could tell you this, Mike. But if there's just basic fairness, right? Fairness, fair is fair. So if you're gonna say, okay, well, you're a higher seed because of this rule, well, okay, well then you're the higher seed in the draft as well. It just makes sense, but hopefully they'll get that right.
The other double dipping that you might be referring to, or at least that made me think of, I had a lot of people ask me, why are there 23 picks in the first round when there are only 20 teams in the Ontario Hockey League? Well, that's because not just one, not even just two, but three teams in this year's OHL draft have the compensatory first round pick. So they're picking twice in that first round of 23 picks. Again, we've talked about this on previous episodes of the podcast, Dan. But since we're here and we're coming into that draft, I really think the OHL has got to watch this because we're seeing it a lot more frequently, almost as though it's a strategy. We pick this first round guy, he doesn't show up, somebody else decides to sign him. Is that happening because of a favor? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. I don't know. But if that other team ends up signing that first rounder, the team that failed to sign him gets a compensatory pick in the next draft. And we've been seeing it happen an awful lot in recent years.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that it's been a strategy in a couple cases for sure, right? And without throwing anyone under the bus and saying that, I'll use a hypothetical situation. But if you're a team that is returning an awful lot of players, looking like a contender the following year, and I'll use the hypothetical situation of those our hometown Kitchener Rangers, Mike, when you look at their roster next year, awful lot of bodies to implement to return. Strategically, would you not say, well, you know what? We probably don't have a slot for a first round pick this year to get much ice. So maybe we'll take a kid we know is not going to report, trade his rights, get that package we get in return, and get the compensatory pick. Use some of that package to bolster up this year. So you can see how it becomes a strategy, right? If you look at your roster and how it's shaping up for the following year. It may sound ridiculous, but why you're the double dip aspect is you're getting both the compensatory pick and what you get for trading that kid's rights. So when it starts to become a strategy, you got to address it. And I've never understood why we don't just have pick. You get the compensatory pick or you get what you trade him for. But once you trade him in this specific windows that already exist to trade these rights, if you trade him in those windows, compensatory pick gone. It's simple. It seems simple to me. But
Well, it seems simple to us. We just have to get the word right to the OHL league offices and we'll get this sorted out. Now that we're into the playoffs, our weekly prospect of the week turns into a performer of the week. Dan and I have made that selection. And it's interesting that Dan mentioned our hometown Kitchener Rangers. It's where we are based. And it was in that arena on Friday night that 6,700 plus were chanting, "Ref, you suck." Could 6,700 plus possibly have been wrong? We'll talk about that as this week's episode of the OHL podcast continues. This NHL season has been as predictable as a puck rolling on its edge. No one knows where it's going, but that just means there's time for your favorite team to figure things out and games left for you to get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. It is super easy for first timers to get started. Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your team, and place your first bet. And if you're new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Dan Mahar, we were both in the same arena as the playoffs opened in Kitchener last Friday night. Rangers, Flint Firebirds, and it was a game. You described it to me in a text message, and I loved it. It was like the Roman Colosseum in the early going. There was not a shift that went by that somebody wasn't throwing a body check, and a pretty thundering one on somebody else. What a physical start we had to that game.
yeah, that's saying something, right? I mean, it's the first time we've all experienced playoff hockey. We all understand that it's more intense, it's more physical. However, I think this was the first time I've ever experienced this phenomenon where a number of the people around me were actually laughing out loud at some of the non-calls. Like they were, you got to be kidding me. Like, and it was both ways. It wasn't just homerism. Oh, you got to call that ref. It was, oh my God, I can't believe he just let that go. Like that was right in front of him. Just like some absolutely vicious play. Like full on charges, a few leaps, some tomahawk chops with the stick. It was pretty vicious for 10 or 12 minutes, I'd say, until players decided you've got to play a little bit of hockey here. This is going to wear us both out. But it was something to behold, and there was seemed to be kind of prison rules for sure.
As it turned out, the Rangers win that game 4-3 in overtime, and there are a total, mark this down, a total of 5 power plays in the game. The Rangers were awarded 2. They went 1 for 2. The Firebirds were awarded 3. They went 0 for 3. I get the sense, Dan, from what you just described and what you heard from folks around you with the outright laughter at calls not being made, that you think this one could have gone, should have gone differently as handled by the officials.
Yeah, and this is a tough one because there's the whole outcry we're going to hear of, "Oh, let them play. It's the playoffs. What two aspects of that bother me is one, when you have some kind of vicious headhunting type play, someone's going to get hurt on a rule violation that wasn't called. But the biggest part that bothers me is just the change in standard. It's if you want to admit it and come out and say, yeah, there's a different standard in the playoffs, where we let more go, it's going to be more freewheeling, deal with it. I don't think that admission's ever made. They try and kind of still stand behind that. Oh, the same standards applies in the season. They absolutely do not, because I would say conservatively. You just said 5 penalties in that game, Mike. I would say
5 power plays. Fair.
Sorry, power plays.
But
Yeah,
yes, but
five
yeah.
power plays. I would say conservatively, based on the standard I saw in this regular season, that would have been 20. So clearly, in my mind, that was a very, very different standard. And it might be what the teams like. Maybe there was a wink, wink, nudge, nudge between the benches and the refs before the game. I don't know. But it was very clearly, to me, a different standard.
So I'm looking at this in a slightly different way. And I'll put it to you this way. And believe you me, I'm not here to carry water for anyone within the OHL officiating department. But here's what I saw. First of all, I saw the first 6, 7, 8 minutes of a hockey game that I enjoyed thoroughly. It's not often you get to see that kind of physicality for that extended a period of time. And we up in the broadcast booth, while not laughing at non-calls like fans maybe around you down in the bowl, Dan, but we were saying there's no way these players can sustain this for a period, much less a series. Things will kind of taper off. And naturally, they did. There was, give it the first 10 minutes, say, of the game was an all-out physical assault on one another with big body checks, some stick work, etc. And then we kind of got down to the idea of playing hockey, hard-nosed hockey for sure, and the fans were treated to a pretty darn good game. But I think when I look at this in the big picture, what I'm thinking we want, I think we demand a lot of officials in sports. We want them to be perfect. And of course, they're not. They're human. And I don't like video review. We've talked about that lots of times. I'm sick and tired of how much we use it and how long we spend trying to figure things out. I want the human element in the game. If the players were perfect, then games would be boring because they would be 0-0 and we'd never have any fun going to the rink. So I don't know why we expect perfection from officials. Yes, there were some times, especially with those trips or hooks or holds that you see, and everybody can see it, and you're thinking, boy, oh boy, that is maybe a different standard than the regular season. But it went both ways. So it's not like you could say one team got jobbed and the other team didn't. And so what I think we want and we should demand of officials is 2 things. One is don't miss the call that decides the game, period, full stop. And if you ask yourself honestly how often that happens, you'll realize that it is incredibly rare. So nobody missed a call that decided the outcome of the game. And the other thing that I think we should demand of our officials is to manage the game, set the tone, establish the standard, and make sure the players play within those parameters. And I think the officials did that on Friday night in that first game between the Firebirds and the Rangers. So I think we got a terrific effort all around that left the fans enjoying a really good hockey game. And I'll say one more thing about this because I got to talk to Paul Flash, the head coach of Flint, before game 2, and he singled out the officials in his pregame comments. So I'll do the same and name drop Sean Kimmerly and Joe Monette from that game. And Paul Flash said they did a great job. Let the players play, let the players decide, and we ended up with a whale of a hockey game. And that came from the losing coach in game number one. So if we don't pump the brakes a little bit here and stop demanding robotic electronic perfection from officials, it's no wonder we can't get anybody to do the job anymore. I love the way they called it.
All right, I'll bite. Um, and this is so the counter argument for me. And I'm not saying they did a terrible job. I'm not like, don't get me wrong. If the officials choose not to call penalties, things that are clearly violations of the rule book, and dial back on that, and like you said, only call it if it takes away a scoring chance over the course of the game, that favors a different type of team, different type of player than it did in the regular season. So it could totally skew the balance of what got us there. And you referenced Paul Flash's comments, and this is not a shot at Flint. This is just generalities I'm speaking in. I would expect the lower ranked, lower skilled, lower seeded team to like games officiated that way, because it adds an element, a way they can compete against a better team, a more skilled team, when things aren't being called, when these assaults. Because when you take some random example. If you're assaulting a third line grinder, he probably wasn't going to score anyway. If you're assaulting Wayne Gretzky, different story. You're taking away what his advantage is. So I'm just throwing that out there as I think there's a middle ground on the let them play. We all don't want a million penalties. Having said that, the rules are pretty clear. They're pretty clearly stated what constitutes a trip, what constitutes a slash, what constitutes interference. If you want to loosen up a little bit on the gray area there, on some of the fringe ones that are borderline, absolutely. But the second you start wantonly ignoring obvious ones, I start to think that goes beyond let them play and into let the team that cheats better succeed. So that's my devil's advocate argument for you, Mike. I'm not saying it's what you said was wrong. I'm just saying I'd like to find a little better balance than we saw.
No, I think you make a great point, Dan. And what I would say in response is I would come back to this idea of game management, because you're absolutely right. You can't just have it be, as my broadcast partner Paul Fixter likes to call it, Hudson Bay rules out there for the entire game, right? And there were probably 3 or 4 that I can remember off the top of my head that were pretty blatant, but that's it. It's not like there were 11 or 12 really blatant hooks, trips, whatever the case may be. And again, nothing impacted the outcome of the game. So I think these fellas managed it well enough. And if it started getting out of hand, it would be the sort of thing that, okay, now you're going, and the player might squawk. It's like, listen, you guys have had your leash here. Now settle down, or I'm going to start calling these things the rest of the way. Again, it comes down to management. And that's why I think from a pretty veteran crew on Friday night in the game that we got to see, that's what we got. And I don't know. I worry. Look, I love a good ref you suck chant as much as the next person, because it shows to me that the fans are engaged in it. I would much rather hear ref you suck than watch fans do the wave. The wave is the stupidest thing you can do in any stadium or arena. So just stop that, because it shows to me that you're bored. If you want to get in, and I'm okay with saying ref you suck if you think that the refs missed some things. But honestly, when we get down and we start re-officiating games and demanding absolute perfection, I think we're creating an impossible task that nobody is ever going to want to do again. So I'll just say it comes down to me for management. As long as it's not 20 or 30 trips, hooks, holds, whatever being let go, keep it to 4, 5, 6, whatever, and manage the game that way. I still much rather have the players decide this.
No, fair enough. And, I'm with you on the chants as well, because I think the ref you suck chant has become somewhat antiquated since we've had 2 officials, or 2 refs, because you think in a game like that, Monette's hearing that and pointing over at Kimberly and say, hey, I think they're talking to you.
Wouldn't that be? He's talking to you. No, he's definitely talking to you. I think that the Ontario Hockey League, I'll just add to this, has done a great job. And we know that Combine is coming back again this summer. This will be the 3rd year for it, I'm pretty sure now. I think it's a great thing that they're doing. I don't know so much about the green armbands that they're wearing in minor hockey now. I think that just shows how how far we've gone in terms of blaming. Like, we always want to blame somebody for something that went wrong to our team. And I get it. I also host the post-game show in Kitchener. So I know how fans can get when they want to blame this player or that play or whatever the case may be. But I just think we're always looking for that scapegoat. Maybe if we just take a breath and sit back and admire the imperfections of the humans out there on the ice, it can make it a whole lot more enjoyable experience, not just for us in the stands because our blood pressure stays down just a little bit, but also for all of those people on the ice, including the ones wearing the stripes.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a guy who coached local minor hockey all year, I can tell you some of the stuff you see from parents in the stands is still outrageous, that people think it's okay to come to games and behave this way. So, and yeah, the whole discussion is not a shot at these refs are high caliber. And in game two in Kitchener and Flint that we just witnessed, Mike, you heard the ref "you suck" calls out again. But I will say that both Nickel and Harrison, I thought, did a very good job today. So credit where it's due. You're going to hear the chant, fellas. You're going to hear it at some point during the game because I guess people in the stands just feel that like that's their entitlement to do. But yeah, let's give some credit where it's due. You're absolutely right.
I heard a great story. And by the way, 13 power plays in game number 2. So a different management style, but also a different game to call. When the score got lopsided, things got a little sillier in game 2 between Kitchener and Flint. But I heard a great story before game 1, as told by a former NHL head coach who was furious at Don Van Massenhoven, who I'm sure you remember, Dan, as well as I do. Anybody that watched the NHL for any amount of time would remember that name. And the coach was just furious that Van Massenhoven had missed a call or thought he missed a penalty. And Van Massenhoven skated by the bench and said, "Listen, I heard you. I missed it," and skated away. I mean, what else do you want? Own it, right? Yeah, you know what? I did miss that one because, I'm not a robot. I'm a human being. And the coach, he said, "I had nothing left. What am I going to say after that?" The guy came over. He admitted that he missed it, and we move on. And what got me, Dan, is the coach talked about how it really just gave him something else to think about. He's like, what good is yelling at this guy going to do? The play's over. It's happened. It didn't lead to a goal. He's admitted, "Sorry, I missed it." And now what? And it completely diffused the situation. I think that matters a lot.
Oh, 100%. I've said for a long time in a lot of competitive spheres or anywhere, a little apology goes a long way. And you're also describing personal accountability, which is something that I feel in society we're losing. So seeing it in this regard is refreshing, I think. And it's funny because I had a tale of a referee this year too, came over to the bench. He had missed a call. I have kind of a no chirping policy. I don't say anything. I never get on the refs, even if they're having a bad day. Like you said, what's the point? Um, However, this ref came over to our bench and instantly started profusely apologizing. "Sorry, coach, I missed that one. That's on me." And I'm sitting there thinking, I didn't even say anything. But I appreciate that you are taking that accountability because absolutely going forward now, I give him absolutely the benefit of the doubt. This is a guy that took accountability. He's on it. He's having that interaction, that communication with the benches and the players. So I respect that. I'll always respect someone that owns up to their mistakes. That's number one.
All through the season, of course, Dan and I enjoy this podcast and like to bring you a prospect of the week, somebody that we thought performed very well, who scouts are looking at heading into this June's NHL draft. Now that we have shifted into playoff time, Dan and I shift prospect of the week into performer of the week. So let me throw it over to you, Dan Mahar. Whose performance stood out to you this first weekend of the playoffs?
It was tough this week, Mike. As you saw, there was a lot of contenders for this one, but I've got to throw my vote to a guy in a series we talked about off the top, and that's Pano Femis, Mike. He had a brilliant start to the week. 8 points, 5 goals, 3 assists in 2 games on the road. If you talk about a veteran leader stepping up to take the bull by the horns for his team, and this kid was all over the ice. It wasn't just a score sheet. He was back checking, lifting sticks, stealing pucks. He was quick, and some of those goals were beauties too, just like NHL level release, zipping it top corner. So yeah, a lot of reasons, a lot of contenders this week, but a lot of reasons to for my guy to be Pano Femis, Mike.
It's an interesting choice by you, Dan, and I love the reason for it. And so if you'll allow me to peel it back a layer here, and I'll make this homerish because it's the market I work in. But Trent Swick of the Kitchener Rangers, who's an overager, just signed his entry level contract about a month ago with the Las Vegas Golden Knights. And he told us in our post game interview after the Rangers' 67th game, so it was their final home game of the season. It allowed them to get to 100 points, something the team was working towards, and they picked up their 47th win. And Swick talked after the game about how much he's enjoyed playing with this group of guys, this, that, the other thing, and how he believes this Ranger team has a chance to make some noise in the playoffs. There's a lot of hockey left for us. And then I watched Trent Swick pick up 3 points in game one and 3 more points in game two of this playoff series against Flint. And this is an overager who is going to graduate out of the league, just like Panofemis in Erie. And you think about Trent Swick, who played 9 playoff games in both 2022 and 2023 and picked up 3 points in those 9 games each year. So 6 total. Then in 7 games last year in the playoffs, Trent Swick picked up 5 points. In 2 games this year, he's already got 6 points. So as an overager showing, hey, I'm not ready for this to be done yet. I'm going to lead by example. I know Colby Barlow is not an overager, but he's not going to be in this league again next year. We all know that. And what does he do to start the playoffs but come out with a hat trick and an assist? You look back a season to 2023 in 4 games, and then he played another 4 games in 2024, had 3 points each year, Colby Barlow, in those 4 games. Then you go back to his first playoff. He has 7 games, picks up 6 points. And then again, 4 points in just 1 game as game number 2 between Oshawa and Brampton is being played as we talk. But you think about it, 4 points in 1 game. The most he'd had is 6 in 7 games in his rookie season. I love these guys who are in their final playoff doing something like this. So a nod to Swick, a nod to Barlow, and my performer of the week is also Panofemis. You see how long I took to get there? But the point, how do you not, right? 6 points in game 2, 8 points through 2 games. And this is a guy that only had 1 taste of the playoffs prior, which was last year. He had 11 points in 6 games a year ago, 8 points in 2 games so far this year. I just like watching these guys who are in it for the last time, elevating their games and maybe saying to the other guys, follow along, boys. Here we go. I loved what Femus has done so far.
Yeah, and I love your prelude to that too as well, Mike, because we've watched Trent Swick has clearly elevated his game for the playoffs. And when I look at who I had in my contention this week for this honor, Colby Barlow, Trent Swick, Panofemis, Martin Misiak for me, and probably the only one who wasn't a 19 or 20-year-old player was Liam Greentree. And these are all players that had phenomenal weeks. There were a couple more as well, but the common denominator, Cedric Guindon as well, 19 and 20-year-old players. Like you said, players on their way out of the league, most likely in most of these cases, having that last hurrah and really stepping up. Because when you talk about kids coming into this league, which we often do, one of the huge benefits of playing this league is leadership like these players are providing. And you see it at this time of year and seeing what Femus and Swick and Barlow are doing. You don't think that's resonating with Luca Romano, with Owen Griffin, with all these kids that are playing, Malcolm Spence, all these kids playing alongside them? That's how the wheels turn over in this league, Mike. So I love the prelude. There's some veteran performers this week.
Cedric Guindon, 2 goals in Kingston's Game 2 win. Gage Hayes plays the overtime hero as the Fronts knock off the Wolves 4-3. So Kingston up 2-0 in that series. Cedric Guindon, Colby Barlow, both former Owen Sound attack players who are down 2-0 to London. Do you think the attack wish they still had a couple of guys like that?
Absolutely. But you know what? We know Owen Sound's run into a wagon in London. Things obviously didn't go well in a very testy first game, but game 2 down 4-0 early, storm back to 4-3. There's fight in that dog. And, a Landon Hookie dropping the gloves, scoring a goal, like, again, veteran leadership. And there is quality in every single market that is playing right now, Mike, in the OHL. And even if your team's a massive underdog, likely not going to win the series, still high entertainment. And Owen Sound is testament to that based on the fight they're putting up. So it's impressive.
Hookie is another great example, Dan. I'm glad you brought him up. Overager. Remember, when the trade deadline rolled around this year, listen, he had a chance to not stay in Owen Sound and maybe be moved to a contender. He wanted to stay. They slapped the C on his sweater for a reason, obviously. No matter what ends up happening, I love your point. They're still fighting that dog in Owen Sound. Landon Hookie is trying to show these young guys the way, and that's putting money in the bank for future playoffs for young players and rebuilding teams like the Owen Sound Attack are. So you're right. There's so much to enjoy. And Dan and I clearly have an eye for the players that are not going to have another playoff run in the OHL.
Which is sad, but there'll be a new wave of them like there always is.
For sure. So our prospect of the week turns to performer, and Dan and I will be here every week with your performers of the week. And of course, the goings on in the OHL playoffs. If you've got a thought or something you want us to cover, or just tell us how you think your team is doing, ohlpodcast@rogers.com is the place, or drop a comment on our YouTube page. And we'll be back with you 1 week from now with another episode of the OHL Podcast.